Welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders. We are so thankful that you joined us. And please remember to subscribe here on our YouTube channel or follow and like us on your favorite social media outlet, which you can find links to in our show notes for even more fair housing news and insights. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders. I'm your host, Jonathan Sarr, and joining me today is Leslie Tucker. Leslie, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks, Jonathan.
Good. We're glad to have you on the show as we get into this discussion on unreasonable accommodations. So we have a scenario that we want to play for our audience, and then we got some questions for you to get your feedback on this topic.
Sure.
Mrs. Lafayette, I just wanted to let you know that your request to install an elevator so that you can access your unit on the second floor was denied. However, if you'd like to come into the office sometime this week, I'd be happy to discuss some alternative options that may be acceptable to you.
How can you deny it? You see that I'm in a wheelchair and I can't get out of my apartment. I'm stuck here unless someone carries me down the stairs. I can't keep doing that for the rest of my life.
Okay, intriguing scenario. So that's very helpful for our discussion today. So our first question. So we hear so much about reasonable accommodations or modifications. What is an unreasonable modification? Accommodation. Accommodation.
I think that's a good question and really an important one for housing providers to be aware of. So for those of you who aren't aware, in order for you as a housing provider to be legally obligated to provide an accommodation to someone with a disability, it has to be both necessary and reasonable. So there may be situations that you come across where an accommodation may be, necessary. Like in this case, this woman does need assistance in getting to the second floor to get into her unit. That is a necessary thing, but not all of these requests are going to be reasonable. So a request that constitutes an undue financial or administrative burden is not considered to be reasonable, and it could be a reason to potentially deny an accommodation request. Also, a request that constitutes a fundamental alteration of your program is not reasonable and also could be a reason to deny a request.
So, Leslie, what does that all mean? And can you give us some examples of when a request may be an undue financial burden or when it could be a fundamental alteration of your program?
Sure, absolutely. I know this can get confusing. So this example of this elevator request is a good example of a request that, certainly would likely constitute an undue financial burden. Another example may be a request to install central air conditioning in a building if, an older building doesn't already have it. Now, be aware, just as a reminder, that the owner or management agent is only required to pay for these modifications if it is federally subsidized housing. Conventional housing owners and managers are not in that same position. Now, the financial effect or ability to kind of call upon this as a defense won't be the same for every property or company. If you deny a request on a financial basis, you may be asked to demonstrate and prove, the financial effect that it would have on your company if the resident, ends up challenging that decision and files a complaint. So if you're a larger company with extensive resources and deeper pockets, you would have probably a harder time, justifying that decision and relying on that defense. If it was challenged, then let's say a smaller company that only managed or owned, a few properties. And of course, conventional housing providers, would have a very hard time making that argument since they don't pay for modifications. So that probably wouldn't be a viable argument for them either. An example of a fundamental alteration would be when someone asks management to provide a service that they don't already provide. An example would be a request to come collect trash, maybe from individual units, or dog walking, something like that. Another example of a fundamental alteration could be if someone asks for a discount in their rent because they happen to be disabled. A unit's rental rate is established by the market, by outside agencies, by federal program requirements. It's never going to be reasonable for a tenant to attempt to set their own rental rate. So that would also fall under the category of fundamental alteration.
Digible is a marketing and technology company specializing in the multifamily housing industry. We're a motley crew of industry professionals who all share a passion for a common purpose: to transform the apartment marketing industry through creative, data-driven, digital marketing and technology solutions and world-class client support. Contact us today at digible.com.
Okay, thank you. Lots of good examples there, so appreciate that. So if a request falls into one of these categories, so does that mean a housing provider can just deny the request?
Well, if you think that a request that you get falls into one of these categories, that could technically be a reason to decline, to not approve that specific request. However, before you, go ahead and provide that written response to the tenant, it's really, really important that you first try to work with that individual to try to identify some alternative options that may work and that may be reasonable. That's called engaging in the interactive process. So, for example, with this example, this elevator request, you've decided that you're going to deny it. But before you do that, you would probably reach out and offer to transfer the person to the first floor. If you had nothing available, you could offer to let them out of their lease. Just trying to find other solutions that would, assist with the problem if what they're asking for isn't inherently reasonable. So always make sure to ask questions and get the tenant's input during those interactions as well.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So could an accommodation or modification be considered unreasonable on one occasion and then reasonable on another, or in reverse? What are your thoughts?
Probably not. Even though, you have to process reasonable accommodation requests on a case-by-case basis. You're going to look at everyone's different needs and disability, related needs. If something is unreasonable for a financial reason or for, because it's an alteration of your program, that's probably not going to change from request to request. So, someone requesting an elevator, at this particular, building that's going to be unreasonable at another building. Or if, you decide that, putting in automatic doors for a very, very small company might stretch you too thin. Another, tenant, on the other side of your property requesting that's probably not going to be different for you as a company. So I don't think it really changes from tenant to tenant.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Leslie. Awesome insights. We appreciate you providing this on this topic for our community today. And thank you for everyone for tuning in to our show. We appreciate your support. So until next time, take care. Thanks again, Leslie.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us. And we can't wait to hear your feedback about today's episode. Do you have a topic that you would like to see discussed in a future episode? feel free to share that with us. In the show notes, you'll see a link to sign up for our newsletter. This newsletter will keep you up to date with our latest episodes, blogs, and information about our online fair housing courses. Thank you again, and happy training.